Hello, welcome back to the Opalis Quick Integration Kit Video Tutorial Series 2 of 3, the QIK SDK. My name is Charles Joy, and I'm a Field Management TSP specializing in Opalis. And today, I'll be showing you how to use the QIK SDK to create your own integration packs.
So as we take a look at the QIK SDK, the first thing we're going to look at is the QIK Application Programming Interface, or API. This is the interface for linking Opalis Integration Server to external classes or libraries. There are three questions you're going to ask yourself when building out your integration pack and as it relates to how you're going to deal with the API. First question is, what inputs does my class require? Secondly, what behavior does my class provide? And thirdly, what outputs does my class publish? You can see here a very small image there at the bottom depicting the Opalis Integration Server on the left, the third-party application on the right, and then obviously the inputs and behavior, and then obviously outputs coming out. There are two programming models available in the QIK SDK, the declarative model and the imperative model. In the declarative model, you declare points of integration using metadata, or .NET attributes. The integration is static and cannot be changed, and the metadata is interpreted by the QIK integration framework. In the imperative model, you get to explicitly implement points of integration using statements. Integration is determined dynamically at runtime, and this provides increased flexibility and power for complex solutions. Now let's take a look at the QIK SDK prerequisites. You'll need Visual Basic, C# or some kind of Java IDE. You'll need to know what the integration requirement is. In other words, what is the integration target? The Opalis QIK DLL, which is a set of .NET classes containing the Opalis SDK API, which is included in the install. And finally, a basic knowledge of Visual Basic, C# or other programming language. The first thing we need to figure out is what our integration target is going to be. For this example, I'm going to use the Web Services API from the Opalis Operator Console. The Operator Console is a web-based service that's available for Opalis, and it has a WSDL. Let me grab that URL. You can see the WSDL has many elements, and we'll be creating a proxy to interact with those elements via the API. Before we actually create the proxy based on that WSDL, let's go ahead and create a C# project. File, new project, class library. We're going to call it Opalis WS. Go ahead and save it. That's a fine location. Go ahead and navigate out to that location. And we'll create a new folder for the proxy. And then we're going to actually use this directory in the proxy's WSDL the generation of the proxy from the WSDL, which we will use the command line WSDL.exe, which exists in this directory on my computer, but yours may vary. Since it is a command line interface, I'm going to use the command prompt. Go ahead and copy this, change the directory, and then we'll be able to run the WSDL.exe. Now, I want to put it in this location, so I'm actually going to include that in the command. And I've actually stored the majority of the command already in the text file. The syntax is WSDL/out:, then the directory you want the file to be created in, including its name, space, and then the URL of the WSDL that you want. Now this happens to be an internal WSDL, but you can attach this to other external WSDLs like the Terra service or whatever WSDL your application might have. Go ahead and copy this command, paste it in here, and let it run. Now it ran pretty quick, but it did generate the proxy in the C# code. So now we're going to go back into the project and include that within the project by showing all files. Here's that folder we created. We'll include it in the project, and then we'll see that the C# class has now been auto-generated with the information that we will need. So next we're going to go ahead and unclick that, and then we'll go ahead and close this, and we'll be able to start working on our objects as soon as we add the reference for Opalis QIK. So we're going to go ahead and add this reference, browse for it. That's located by default after the install in Program Files, Opalis Software, Quick Integration Kit, lib, and there it is. As this likely is the first time you've seen the Opalis SDK API, it's probably best to go ahead and read some of the documentation that came with the API, and there, as well as the examples that have been included. To find those, navigate to C Program Files, Opalis Software, Quick Integration Kit 3, Docs, and you can see there's documentation for the C# API specifications, so on and so forth, as well as examples for C# and as well as Java. So you can see there's an example project that I will actually open to help guide us through creation of an object. I'll go ahead and open up a new instance here. I actually had it open previously, so I'll open that. And here we can see there are many different C# classes with examples on how to use the Opalis API. I'll open a simple one. Where we can see what has been done in this example. We declare as an object. We declare inputs. We declare outputs. And we perform the action within the output. Now this is the declarative model. This is what I'll be using for this very simple example against the web service. So we're going to go ahead and create our class based on the information in this API. So to save some time, I'm going to go ahead and copy and paste. Get rid of that one anyway, it doesn't matter. And then actually before we continue on, I know this is web services related, obviously, because we have web services here. And you can see some of them aren't resolving, and that's because we don't have the references. So I'm going to go ahead and add some references. So I want to add system.web, and then I also want to add system.webservices. And that should make those happy. We'll go ahead and close that up, and then we'll continue on building our class. So as we saw previously, and we have to declare this as an object, so we'll go ahead and just do a little copy. Paste, and then we'll call this authenticate, because that's the first method we're going to go ahead and create. Authenticate. Make this a public class. And then we need to declare some inputs. First one is username, which is a string. Username. And we'll have to declare some strings ahead of time here. String username and string password. And actually that will result in a token. And of course this will vary based on what web service you're using, but I happen to know these are the things that it takes for this web service, the Opalis web service. So this is actually going to be username. Then we have our first input. Go ahead and copy this and paste that and make password here. Because it's a password, we want to make sure it's password protected, so that's one of the options we can use. Equals true. So this will appear as stars in the UI and stored as encrypted in the database. Password. And then we have our two inputs. Alright, now we need our output and do the work actually to take care of what we need. So we'll just copy this output, paste that, we'll name it token, and the description we could say the token received upon authentication. The result will be a string called token, and we'll go ahead and just put a temporary thing in there. Now we're going to go ahead and take this from a temporary holding place here to actually vetting this output and the return out. So we'll go ahead and add some space in here. So we don't need that much space. So we actually need to call the authenticate method within the policy info service bean. So first thing I'm going to do is create the following. And I'm going to go ahead and fill in what this call needs based on the information we're going to get from the form or the UI in Opalis. Do that for username and password. And then I'm going to actually call the policy info service bean service. I'll just call it policy info service equals new, and then of course I will identify the token based on policy info service dot authenticate, passing the authentication that I built. Dot token, and that should be it. If we have everything correct, this should compile or build. Go ahead and build it, and it all succeeded. So we can go ahead and test that DLL within Opalis. Go ahead, minimize some stuff, open up Opalis, and we'll go ahead and test this. You can see I was already testing it, huh? So I'm going to navigate to it, and it's going to be in my documents, and this guy, documents, projects, Opalis WS, it's buried in here. There it is. Identify the class that I want. And then there is no setup for this. We could alternatively create configuration, which would be more wise based on this is authentication, and it will be used by all of the things that need it. So we can go ahead and do that after we test it. And then we're going to fill out username and password. So for this, it's win2k8 domain / administrator and the password. Finish, and now we can go ahead and test it and see if we get a token back. So we'll go ahead and hit run. It says green. See if we got a token, and we did get a token. We could also check the ops console, and it did say that we authenticated here. So looks like we're one step closer to starting to use our web service. Obviously we created a simple object there based on authentication, but the next thing we'll take a look at is moving that simple class into something where you can actually use it as configuration. As promised, we're going to go ahead and move this authentication piece into a configuration or settings class so we can use it in all the other objects that we might create for this project. And there's an example of this within the examples that were provided, and it happens to be with the matrix addition and the matrix dimension, where the matrix dimensions are is the actual data class here. So what we're going to do is go back into ours and transform this guy, or actually we'll create a new one and make it into a settings or configuration class. And I didn't notice this before, but we didn't rename this, so we will now. Go ahead and create a new one. It'll be let's see, Opalis WS settings. So I'm going to actually be using the majority of this, so I'll just copy it out and paste it in here. Instead of object, it's going to be Opalis data, and it'll be Opalis web service settings, we'll call it. I'll name this to Opalis web service settings. So we're actually going to use the majority of what's already here, if not all of it. We just need to add some getters, and I think we'll be in business. So let's add some getters to the inputs, and we'll move on. So we're going to use the example that we had previously. Let's change this to username. I want the password. And I think we're good to go for this guy as far as settings is concerned. Now we could create a new object. We'll leave the authenticate one alone, but we'll use its code as a starting point. Go ahead and create a new object. Call it get token. Get token. Get token. Alright. And we don't need, we'll need one of these, just the token one. We don't need any inputs, so it'll strictly be an output. Token description, that's fine. Click token. And all of this has already been taken care of, so we just actually need to declare our settings. So Opalis, here's settings, we'll make that private. And then, like we did in the example here, we're at addition. Go ahead and grab the configuration. Reassociate these guys, and we're good to go. So we now can use that down here and get rid of all this stuff. And this changes to settings dot token. And much cleaner object. All the authentication is done within the settings class, and we can actually just grab this token whenever we need it for all the other objects. So let's test this, see if it'll work. Looks like it succeeded. So we'll minimize our examples, pop into Opalis, now that we're actually in Opalis, we'll go ahead and set up those settings that we just, or configure the settings that we just created. So for this test object, we're going to use the invoke.net 3.0, add a new connection. We're going to call this Opalis WS settings. Choose the assembly, which is the one we've been working on, the class, which is the settings, and then fill it out. Win2k8 domain backslash administrator and the password. Okay, finish. And now we could use those settings when we're configuring our object. So go ahead and grab the get token, choose our settings. While we still don't have input properties, or we no longer have input properties, we will be able to get the token information based on the settings that we've created. Go ahead and test this, and hopefully we'll get a token. Looks like it's green, and we did get a token, and that was with much less code and abstracting all of that authentication right into the settings. And now we can use that token, as I said, in any of the objects automatically, as opposed to needing to pass that information in every time. Up to this point, we've just been dealing with a declarative programming model. And as you know, it is very static, where we define outputs and inputs, and there's nothing dynamic about it. Now, we've done some pretty interesting things with the first starting with the authenticate, where we put everything in one class. Then we created settings and abstracted the actual authentication and the action of authenticating and passing a token into another class. Finally, ending with an object that is very minimal and just basically gets the token, very simple class, but uses the configuration data as well as the output that can be put on the data bus. Now, these were static models, as I said, using the declarative model. The next things we're going to look at are actually the imperative model. We'll still be using the settings that we created here, because that was a great method of authenticating, but we won't need to make any modifications to those. Now, I have previously set up a couple classes that use the imperative programming model, and I'll be going over the different parts of the classes and what you'll need to add if you want to do this. Now, there are examples within the examples provided, and you can certainly look at those, or you can take a look at what I have here. So at first glance, this may look very similar, since we have the configuration information here and settings and token from the last one. But there is an interface that we added, Opalis object, and this allows us to start utilizing both the design and execute portions of the imperative model for the API. Now, once we add this, we can start adding the other interfaces down here for the design and the request. So we'll scroll down and take a look at the design. As this object does not have any input, we do not have to add it, but if we did want to add it, we could say designer.add input, and then we can add the name of the input and then things about it, or we can add with a Boolean browser, computer browser, datetime browser, default values, things like that, or enums, file browsers, folders, and list browsers. So you could certainly make your inputs very dynamic and rich for the user interface. But the object that we're building here does not take any inputs. It's just simply getting policy info, and in fact it will be getting all the policies, a list of all the policies, so we won't be adding any inputs. But we do need some outputs. The first output we're going to add is the policy count. So how many policies are we getting returned? And we add that by typing designer.add output, then the name of the output, and then what value we want it to be, so as number. We could also add descriptions in here as well. With description, and this is number of policies returned. Alright. The second kind of output we're going to add is correlated data. Now, this is a little more complex than just a simple value that we're adding, because this actually takes multiple lines of data and publishes the data bus, for which we'll need a separate class, a data class, to accommodate this data. But the syntax we need here is designer add correlated data, type of, and then what I called it here is the policy info adapter, which we'll hop over to now. So you'll note that this class looks very similar to the data class that we created for the configuration, except this time we're going to be using it for multi-value data. So we declare it as a Opalis data class, give it a name. We're going to declare a string so we can use it. We're going to create a method within here that will take some data in, and then we're going to create a Opalis output based on that data. So the description for the output will be policy name. We're also going to add something called the Opalis filter, so we have the ability to filter on it once it's in the object. Again, we're going to name that piece of data policy name, and then I'm just going to use the syntax here. You'll see how this is used in the other class. So back to the other class, we've already created our policy info adapter, and we've seen that data class there. So let's take a look at the execute statement, which is a little more complex. So, like before, we're going to need the policy info service bean service. So we create that. We go ahead and get the token from our settings. Because we're creating multi-line data, we'll create a list, and then now we need to call the actual method that will get all the policies, which is called get all policies. We'll assign that the token, and then we'll get the return value, which in this case is the type of policy, which is an array of the policy data that's coming back. Now we're going to iterate through that array and grab the name, adding it to the list. Once we have that list, we can use it in our policy info data. As you see down below, we've created an IEnumerable using the policy info adapter, passing in that list, and then iterating through it, passing it to the policy info adapter that we previously created to maybe parse out the information that we might need and put it on the data bus. At the same time, we're going to count up the, oh, look at that, num policies. We'll go ahead and change this right now. So this value will be used to count the number of policies, and as it's a return value from the response with filtering, publishing the range, policy info data. Then we're going to publish the entire response for that policy count, and keep in mind that this has to be the same as what it was declared up here in the design, and then what value are we actually publishing. So let's take a look at what this looks like in action. So we'll rebuild the changes I've made. We'll go into Opalis, and we'll choose this guy. Get policy info, choose the settings. Like I said before, there's no input, but because we added that filter option in the data class, and when we published it, we have the ability to filter on policy name or whatever else we add to that filter. And the relation will be based on what type of data. So this is string, so we get string operators. And if I filter on this, I will only get results published to the data bus that meet the criteria here. For now, we're going to leave that blank, and we're just going to get all the policies as it says. So I'm going to go ahead and test this out. Once we run this, we should see two main fields that we're going to be looking at: the policy count and the policy name. So if we scroll down, we see the policy count in my implementation here is 610, and then the policy name field is populated with all 610 of those policy names. And this is that list that we created and set up and was able to publish to the data bus. Next, what we're going to do is modify the code so that we can add another value to the correlated data. And the data we're going to add is ID. And I'm just going to do it this way. since it's much easier to pass the information out of and through the policy info adapter. So as you saw when I was typing this, the web service offers quite a few different methods we can add as data points in our object results. But for this, we're going to choose ID. And then now that this is being concatenated with a semicolon and passed still through the policy info adapter, we have to go change the policy info adapter code. So instead of policy info being actual string, we're going to actually make this into an array and add a couple other fields here. String policy name, string policy ID, and we'll just put that one in front of that one. Alright. And now we need to say result.split by semicolon, and then we just need to identify, oh goodness, I named that with a capital P. We need to extract that from the array there. And policy name equals policy info. That should be good. Now we're going to use name here, and we'll just copy and paste this for a new value. ID, filter, and policy ID, and then finally policy ID. This should have successfully added the information to the policy info adapter that's parsing the policy ID and name out to present it on the data bus as multi-value data. So we're going to go ahead and rebuild this. Looks like it succeeded. I'm going to navigate to Opalis. We're going to go ahead and test this guy. So we're going to just reassociate, grab the setup. Still no input properties, but there should be another filter. And there it is, policy ID and policy name. Because they're both string, you get string operators. So we're not going to filter, but we are going to test this out and get execution data and see that we have the three fields: policy count, policy ID, and policy name. That was successful. We can see policy ID and name have multiple values, and policy count is still the same. So we can see there's policy ID and policy name. We can see there's many of them. The last bit we're going to cover in this video tutorial is how to wrap up the newly created DLL with all those handy Opalis objects or classes within them into an actual integration pack or OIP file. And we're going to use the QIK wizard to do so. We're going to go ahead and open up the QIK wizard. If we had one previously created and we wanted to update it, we could import it here. We're going to click Next. We're going to give it a name. We're going to call it Opalis WS. Category name. This is what would show up as the on the right hand side within Opalis. So this will be Opalis Web Service. Manufacturer, you can put whatever you want, or what suits you rather. And then you have the ability to choose a different resource file, which we will get to in the video tutorial 3 of 3, QIK icons. But for now, we're going to use the default, which offers us many different icons to use. I'm actually going to use the default little suitcase, and I'm going to move on. Now I'm going to add some objects to this. First, we need to identify the library we're using. So, navigate out to our project, Opalis WS. There it is. And then we get to enumerate the objects we've created. So obviously we have the ability to choose the authenticate one that we created. And obviously you wouldn't choose all of these because these were step-by-step learnings. But for training purposes, we'll go ahead and add all three. And this is where you can add the description, so the actual object itself will have a description. And we get to choose an icon based from that same resource file. We'll just choose an internet one there. Now, as I stated, you'll have the ability to create your own icons and choose from your list of your specific icons in once you learn how in the video tutorial 3 of 3. So we got a couple more objects to add. It keeps the library, which is nice. We'll add the get policy info. Get policy info from the Opalis web service. We'll choose a different icon, maybe this one. And then one last one is the get token, and this is just simply get token from and just randomly pick one, doesn't really matter. Finish, and now we have three objects in our what will soon to be our integration pack. Go ahead, next. If we had any dependent files, we would add them here by simply browsing out to them. We don't for this project, so we'll just go ahead and leave it blank. Next, and this is where we want to actually name the integration pack. I usually keep them within the same folder structure, so I know where they are. So we'll just call this Opalis WS, and then it'll be named. There we go. And then it'll generate the OIP file. Once it's been generated, we'll be able to deploy it. I'm not actually going to deploy it today, but I'll show you how to do that. And we do that with the deployment manager. So while we're waiting for that, and it was successful, I will open up the deployment manager. And because it's an OIP file, let's close that to make sure it's not going to. Because it's an OIP file, we'll be able to just interact with it the same way. So it's a two-step process where we register, we navigate out to it. That's why it's important to remember where you put it. And you would follow through the process. Once it was actually registered, then you would simply deploy it, and it would be within this list here. So that concludes our video tutorial on the QIK SDK. So let's take a look at the steps we accomplished in this QIK SDK video tutorial. First, we determined the integration to be created, and that was the Opalis web service for the operator console. Next, we created a web services.net proxy from an online WSDL for the API of the integration to be created. Then we used the web services.net proxy in the QIK integration project in Visual C#. We then wrote a configuration, input, method, and output code using the Opalis SDK API. We successfully compiled the QIK integration project. We tested the newly created DLL using the invoke.net object. We then made changes, rebuilt the code, and retested as necessary. At the end, we created an Opalis integration pack file from the DLL. We created an OIP file using the Opalis QIK wizard. And then finally, I showed you how to deploy the newly created QIK integration pack to the Opalis integration server. While I didn't deploy it itself, you certainly can do it using the deployment manager. One of the main reasons I didn't deploy it is that it was in test and it wasn't complete. I make sure I test everything thoroughly in the DLL using the invoke.net object before I actually commit to creating a real OIP file and deploying it to my test or production systems. The following are some QIK related documentation. all included within the install. Be sure to check out related content on this QIK Video Tutorial Series. 1 of 3 was QIK CLI, 2 of 3 is QIK SDK, the one you just watched, and 3 of 3 is QIK Icons.
We certainly appreciate you watching. Thank you.